The crisp autumn air carried a hint of melancholy as David Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse suite, gazing out at the twinkling lights of New York City. His reflection stared back at him, a man in his early 40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, with salt and pepper hair that betrayed the stress of the past decade. To the world, he was David Blackwood, the business tycoon who had built an empire from nothing. But behind closed doors, he was simply a man. 10 years. It had been 10 long years since Elena, the love of his life, had vanished without a trace. The memory of that fateful day was etched into his mind like a scar that refused to heal. He had woken up to find her side of the bed cold, her clothes still hanging in the closet, her favorite perfume lingering in the air. It was as if she had simply evaporated into thin air, leaving behind nothing but questions and a void that threatened to consume him. David's fingers tightened around the crystal tumbler in his hand, the amber liquid within catching the light. He had spent a fortune trying to find her, private investigators, rewards, even consulting with psychics in moments of desperate weakness. But as the years passed, hope had slowly given way to a dull, throbbing acceptance. Elena was gone, and he was left to pick up the pieces of his shattered world. A soft knock at the door pulled David from his reverie. "Mr. Blackwood," his assistant's voice called out. "The car is ready to take you to the charity gala." David closed his eyes for a moment, steeling himself for another evening of forced smiles and small talk. These events had become a necessary evil in his life, a way to maintain his public image and continue the philanthropic work that had become his sole purpose. With a deep breath, he turned from the window and crossed the room, pausing only to straighten his tie in the mirror. "Thank you, Sarah," he said as he opened the door. "I'll be down in a moment." The ride to the gala was a blur of city lights and muted conversations with his driver. David's mind wandered, as it often did, to memories of Elena. Her laugh, the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the feeling of her hand in his. It had taken years of therapy for him to be able to think of her without crumbling, but the pain never truly went away. The Rosewood Hotel loomed before them, its grand facade illuminated by spotlights. A red carpet stretched from the curb to the entrance, lined with photographers and reporters eager to catch a glimpse of New York's elite. David plastered on his practiced smile as he stepped out of the car, nodding politely to the flashing cameras. "Mr. Blackwood, over here." "David, a word for the post? How much are you donating tonight, Mr. Blackwood?" The questions blurred together as he made his way inside, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with familiar faces. The grand ballroom was a sea of designer gowns and tailored suits, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the sound of clinking champagne glasses. "David, darling," a familiar voice cut through the crowd. Vivian Hartley, a longtime friend and fellow philanthropist, air kissed his cheeks. "We were beginning to think you wouldn't show." "You know I wouldn't miss it, Vivian," David replied, forcing warmth into his voice. "The Children's Hospital is a cause close to my heart." Of course," Vivian nodded, her eyes scanning the room. "Oh, you simply must meet the Andersons. They've just moved here from London Inn." David allowed himself to be led through the crowd, engaging in polite conversation and sipping champagne. It was a routine he had perfected over the years: smile, nod, make a witty comment, move on. But tonight, something felt different. There was an electricity in the air, a tension he couldn't quite place. As he excused himself from a group of bankers to get another drink, David felt a sudden shift in the room's energy. The constant hum of conversation faltered, replaced by hushed whispers and shocked gasps. Curious, he turned towards the entrance, and in that moment, his world stopped spinning. There, framed by the ornate doorway, stood a woman who should have been a ghost. Her raven hair cascaded over bare shoulders, a shimmering gold dress hugging every curve. But it was her eyes, those hauntingly familiar green eyes, that made David's heart stop. Elena. The champagne flute slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. But David barely noticed. He couldn't tear his gaze away from the woman who had haunted his dreams for a decade. She was older, yes, with a hint of lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. But it was unmistakably her. As if in a trance, David took a step forward, then another. The crowd parted before him, sensing the gravity of the moment. Elena's eyes locked with his, a mixture of emotions flashing across her face: fear, longing, and something else he couldn't quite read. "Elena," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the pounding of his heart. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but before she could, a tall, distinguished man appeared at her side. He placed a possessive hand on the small of her back, leaning in to whisper something in her ear. Elena's eyes never left David's, even as she nodded in response to whatever the man had said. David's mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. Elena, his Elena, was alive. She was here, in the flesh, draped in luxury and accompanied by a stranger. The questions that had tormented him for years came rushing back with renewed urgency. Where had she been? Why had she left? And how, in God's name, had she returned with such obvious wealth and a mysterious companion? As the initial shock began to wear off, David became aware of the eyes of the entire room upon them. This was no place for the conversation they needed to have. With a determination he didn't know he possessed, he strode across the room, closing the distance between them. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Now." Elena hesitated, glancing at the man beside her. He gave an almost imperceptible nod, and she turned back to David. "Not here," she replied, her voice sending shivers down David's spine. "Meet me on the terrace in 5 minutes." With that, she turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving David standing alone, his world once again turned upside down. As he made his way to the terrace, his mind raced with possibilities. One thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The woman he had mourned for a decade was back, and with her return came a mystery that threatened to unravel everything he thought he knew about their life together. The cool night air hit David like a slap to the face as he stepped onto the terrace. He gripped the railing, trying to steady himself as he waited for Elena. The city sprawled out before him, a tapestry of lights and shadows, but he saw none of it. His entire being was focused on the impending conversation, a moment he had dreamed of for years but never truly believed would come. 5 minutes stretched into an eternity. David's mind raced through 1,000 scenarios, each more implausible than the last. Had Elena been kidnapped? Was she in witness protection? Or had she simply chosen to leave him, to start a new life without a word of explanation? The soft click of heels on stone announced her arrival. David turned, his breath catching in his throat as Elena stepped into the moonlight. She was even more beautiful up close, the years having added a maturity and grace to her features that took his breath away. "Hello, David," she said softly, her voice a mixture of warmth and caution. 1,000 questions burned on David's tongue, but all he could manage was a choked, "Why?" Elena's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "It's complicated, David. More complicated than you could ever imagine." "Try me," he replied, his voice gaining strength. "You owe me that much, Elena. 10 years. 10 years of not knowing if you were alive or dead. Of blaming myself, of searching every face in every crowd. Do you have any idea what that's like?" She flinched at the pain in his words. "I never wanted to hurt you, David. You have to believe that. Everything I did to protect you." "Protect me?" David's laugh was hollow. "From what? What could possibly justify disappearing without a trace, leaving me to think the worst?" Elena glanced over her shoulder, as if checking to see if they were truly alone. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I can't tell you everything, not here. It's not safe. But I need you to trust me when I say that my disappearance was necessary. There are things at play here that are bigger than us, David. Dangerous things." David's mind reeled. This wasn't the reunion he had imagined countless times over the years. In his dreams, Elena had always run into his arms, explaining that it had all been a terrible mistake. But the woman before him now was guarded, secretive, a stranger wearing his wife's face. "And the man you're with?" he asked, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. "Is he part of these dangerous things?" A flicker of something, fear, guilt, passed across Elena's face. "Marco is complicated, but he's kept me safe all these years. I owe him my life." "And what do you owe me?" David countered, taking a step closer. I was your husband, Elena. We promised each other forever. Does that mean nothing to you? Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks, glistening in the moonlight. It means everything, David. You have no idea how many times I wanted to come back, to explain. But I couldn't. I still can't, not fully. Please, try to understand. David reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek, wiping away a tear. Elena leaned into his touch for a moment before pulling away, her eyes darting back towards the ballroom. I have to go, she said urgently. I've already said too much. But David, listen to me. Things are going to get complicated. Whatever happens, whatever you hear or see, remember this moment. Remember that I love you. I've always loved you. Before David could respond, Elena pressed a small, cold object into his hand. If you want answers, come to this address tomorrow at midnight. Come alone, and tell no one. Please, David, it's important. With that, she turned and hurried back into the ballroom, leaving David standing alone on the terrace, his mind spinning. He looked down at the object in his hand, a small, ornate key with a series of numbers etched into its surface. As he watched Elena disappear into the crowd, her golden dress shimmering under the chandeliers, David knew that his carefully rebuilt world had just been shattered once again. The woman he had mourned for a decade was alive, but shrouded in mystery and apparent danger. And now, he held in his hand the key to unraveling it all. David slipped the key into his pocket, his heart racing with a mixture of hope, fear, and determination. Whatever secrets Elena was hiding, whatever dangers lurked in the shadows of her new life, he would face them. He had lost her once, he wouldn't lose her again. As he stepped back into the gala, the sounds of laughter and music washing over him, David felt like a man waking from a long, dark dream. The world around him seemed sharper, more vivid. For the first time in 10 years, he felt truly alive. Tomorrow at midnight, he would get his answers. And nothing, not time, not danger, not even Elena's own warnings, would stop him from uncovering the truth. The mystery of the vanished wife had only deepened, but David Blackwood was ready to solve it, no matter the cost. The following day passed in a haze for David. He went through the motions of his daily routine, meetings, phone calls, paperwork. But his mind was elsewhere, constantly replaying the events of the previous night. Elena's face, her voice, the weight of the mysterious key in his pocket. It all seemed like a dream, too surreal to be true. As the hours ticked by, anticipation and dread battled within him. What would he discover at midnight? Was he walking into a trap, or would he finally get the answers he'd been seeking for a decade? At 11:30 p.m., David found himself in the back of his town car, directing his driver to an address in a part of town he rarely frequented. The buildings here were older, their facades worn by time and neglect. Street lamps cast pools of sickly yellow light, barely penetrating the shadows that seemed to lurk in every alleyway. Are you sure about this, Mr. Blackwood? His driver, Frank, asked, concern evident in his voice. This isn't exactly a safe neighborhood, especially at this hour. David appreciated the man's loyalty, but his mind was made up. I'll be fine, Frank. Wait here for me. If I'm not back in an hour, call this number. He handed Frank a slip of paper with his lawyer's contact information. It was a precaution he hoped he wouldn't need. As he stepped out of the car, the cool night air carried the faint scent of the nearby river. David's hand instinctively went to his pocket, fingers closing around the ornate key Elena had given him. With each step towards his destination, memories of their life together flooded his mind. He remembered their first meeting, a charity auction where Elena had outbid him for a painting he desperately wanted. Her competitive spirit and mischievous smile had captivated him instantly. Their whirlwind romance had been the talk of New York's elite, culminating in a fairy tale wedding that still graced the society pages years later. Those happy memories made the pain of her disappearance all the more acute. How could the woman who had shared his dreams, his bed, his very soul, have vanished without a trace? And now that she was back, why all the secrecy and intrigue? Lost in thought, David almost missed the nondescript door tucked between a boarded-up storefront and a dingy laundromat. The peeling paint revealed decades of neglect, but the newly installed security camera above the door told a different story. This was no abandoned building. David glanced at his watch. 11:58 p.m. Taking a deep breath, he withdrew the key from his pocket and inserted it into the lock. It turned smoothly, the door opening with a soft click that seemed deafening in the quiet street. The interior was a stark contrast to the building's exterior. David found himself in a small, well-lit anteroom. The walls were a crisp white, adorned with abstract paintings that wouldn't have looked out of place in a high-end gallery. A sleek security panel blinked silently next to an elevator door. As David hesitated, unsure of his next move, the elevator dinged softly. The doors slid open, revealing Elena. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back in a loose bun. Gone was the glittering socialite from the gala. This Elena looked more like the woman he remembered, beautiful in an understated way that had always taken his breath away. "You came," she said softly, relief evident in her voice. "I wasn't sure you would." David stepped into the elevator, his eyes never leaving hers. "Did you really think I wouldn't?" A sad smile played at the corners of Elena's lips. "After everything I've put you through? I wouldn't have blamed you if you'd stayed away." The elevator began its descent, the smooth motion belying the tension between its occupants. David had imagined this moment countless times over the years. All the things he would say, the questions he would ask. But now, faced with the reality of Elena's presence, words failed him. It was Elena who broke the silence. "David, before we go any further, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to show you, what I'm about to tell you, it will change everything. Once you know the truth, there's no going back. Are you sure you're ready for that?" The elevator came to a stop, but the doors remained closed. David realized Elena was waiting for his answer. He looked into her eyes, searching for a trace of the woman he had married. Despite the years and the secrets between them, he saw a glimmer of the love they had once shared. "I've spent 10 years in the dark, Elena," he said firmly. "Whatever the truth is, whatever you've been hiding, I need to know." "I'm ready." Elena nodded, a mixture of relief and apprehension crossing her face. She pressed her palm against a biometric scanner next to the elevator panel. With a soft hiss, the doors slid open, revealing a scene that made David question his sanity. They stepped out into what could only be described as a high-tech command center. Banks of computers lined the walls, their screens displaying a dizzying array of data, stock prices, news feeds, satellite imagery. At the center of the room stood a holographic projection of the globe, slowly rotating and covered in pulsing lights and moving patterns. What is all this?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena moved to stand beside him, her presence both comforting and unsettling. "This, David, is the reason I disappeared. This is what I've been protecting you from for the past 10 years. She gestured towards the holographic display. "What you're seeing is a real-time representation of global financial markets, overlaid with data from various intelligence agencies and our own network of informants. This is the nerve center of an organization that operates in the shadows of the world's economies." David's mind reeled as he tried to process what he was seeing. "Are you saying you're part of some kind of financial espionage ring?" Elena's laugh was tinged with bitterness. "If only it were that simple. The truth is, David, I'm part of something much bigger and much more dangerous. We call ourselves the Chimera Syndicate." She led him to a workstation, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Images and documents flashed across the screen, bank transfers involving astronomical sums, classified government reports, surveillance photos of people David recognized from news headlines. "The Chimera Syndicate has existed for centuries," Elena explained, her voice taking on a lecturer's tone. "We operate behind the scenes, influencing global events to maintain a delicate balance of power. Economics, politics, even wars, we have a hand in it all." David felt as though the floor was shifting beneath his feet. The implications of what Elena was saying were staggering. But why? To what end? Elena's eyes met his, and he saw a weariness in them that hadn't been there before. To prevent something much worse. There are forces in this world, David, governments, corporations, individuals, who would plunge us into chaos for their own gain. We act as a counterbalance, a hidden hand guiding humanity away from the brink. David's mind was racing, trying to reconcile the woman he had loved with this new, shadowy figure before him. And you've been part of this all along? Even when we were married? Pain flashed across Elena's face. No, not then. I was recruited after I left. They approached me, showed me things that made me question everything I thought I knew about how the world works. I saw an opportunity to make a real difference, to protect not just you, but millions of others. Protect me? David's voice rose, anger and confusion battling within him. Elena, you disappeared without a trace. Do you have any idea what that did to me? How can you stand there and tell me it was for my protection? Elena reached out as if to touch him, then thought better of it. I know it sounds impossible to believe, but it's the truth. The work we do, it's dangerous, David. There are people, powerful people, who would stop at nothing to destroy us and everyone associated with us. By disappearing, by cutting all ties with my old life, I kept you safe from their reach. David ran a hand through his hair, struggling to process everything he was hearing. So why come back now? Why risk exposing yourself, and me, after all this time? Elena's expression grew grave, because the stakes have never been higher. We've uncovered a plot that could destabilize the entire global economy, plunging the world into a chaos from which it might never recover. And the worst part is, it's coming from within our own ranks. She turned back to the computer, pulling up a series of documents and photographs. For the past year, we've been tracking unusual patterns in global currency markets. At first, we thought it was just normal fluctuations, but then we started noticing discrepancies in our own operations. Money disappearing, agents going dark, crucial information falling into the wrong hands. David leaned in, his business acumen kicking in despite the surreal nature of the situation. The financial data on the screen was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Complex algorithms predicting market trends with uncanny accuracy, transaction logs detailing the movement of billions of dollars across shadowy accounts. We believe there's a faction within the Chimera Syndicate that's gone rogue, Elena continued. They're using our resources, our intelligence, to orchestrate a series of events that will trigger a global financial meltdown. Stock markets will crash, currencies will become worthless overnight, governments will fall, and in the chaos, they'll position themselves to take control. The gravity of what Elena was describing began to sink in. If what she was saying was true, the entire world was teetering on the brink of disaster. But a nagging doubt still pulled at David's mind. Why tell me all this? He asked. Why involve me in something so dangerous? Elena's eyes met his, and for a moment, he saw a vulnerability there that reminded him of the woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago. Because I need your help, David. Your financial expertise, your connections in the business world, they could be crucial in stopping this plot before it's too late. She took a step closer, close enough that David could smell the faint scent of her perfume, the same one she had worn on their wedding day. But more than that, I missed you. Every day for the past 10 years, I've thought about you, wondered if I made the right choice. Seeing you at the gala, I realized that I couldn't keep you in the dark any longer. Whatever happens next, you deserve to know the truth. David's head was spinning. Part of him wanted to run, to dismiss everything he'd seen and heard as an elaborate hoax or a vivid nightmare. But a larger part, the part that had never stopped loving Elena, knew that she was telling the truth. If I agree to help you, he said slowly, what exactly would that entail? And what about the man you were with at the gala, Marco, was it? Where does he fit into all this? A shadow passed over Elena's face at the mention of Marco's name. Marco is complicated. He's been my partner in the syndicate for years, and he's brilliant at what he does. But lately, I've begun to suspect that he might be involved with the rogue faction. If I'm right, he's not just a threat to our mission, he's a threat to you. The implication hung heavy in the air between them. David realized that by coming here, by learning the truth, he had irrevocably altered the course of his life. There was no going back to the world of board meetings and charity galas, not when the fate of that world hung in the balance. All right, he said, squaring his shoulders. I'm in. Tell me what you need me to do. Relief washed over Elena's face, followed quickly by determination. She turned back to the computer, pulling up a series of financial reports and news articles. We need to start by tracking the money. The rogue faction has been siphoning funds from our accounts, laundering them through a series of shell companies before reinvesting in key industries. If we can follow the trail, we might be able to identify the key players and predict their next move. As Elena began to explain the intricacies of their financial detective work, David felt a familiar excitement building within him. This was what he was good at, unraveling complex financial puzzles, seeing patterns where others saw only chaos. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive. But even as he immersed himself in the data before him, a part of David remained acutely aware of Elena's presence beside him. The years apart seemed to melt away as they worked together, finishing each other's sentences and building on each other's ideas. It was as if no time had passed at all. Hours slipped by unnoticed as they delved deeper into the tangled web of global finance. The sun was peeking over the horizon when Elena finally leaned back in her chair, rubbing her tired eyes. "We've made good progress," she said, a note of pride in her voice. "But this is just the beginning. The people we're up against, they're smart, ruthless, and they have resources we can only dream of. It's not going to be easy, and it's certainly not going to be safe." David reached out, taking Elena's hand in his. The simple touch sent a jolt through him, awakening feelings he had thought long buried. "I understand the risks," he said softly. "But I'm not walking away. Not again." Elena's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she squeezed his hand. "David, there's so much I want to say, so much I need to explain. But right now, we need to focus on the task at hand. Lives are at stake, maybe even the fate of the entire world." David nodded, reluctantly releasing her hand. "You're right. We should get some rest and then dive back in. But Elena, when this is all over, when we've stopped whatever it is we're trying to stop, we need to talk. Really talk. About us, about the past 10 years, about everything." A sad smile played at the corners of Elena's lips. "I'd like that," she said softly. "More than you know." As they prepared to leave the underground facility, David couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the precipice of something monumental. In the span of a single night, his world had been turned upside down. The woman he had mourned for a decade was not only alive but embroiled in a global conspiracy that threatened everything he knew. But as he watched Elena gather her things, he felt a surge of determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers they might face, he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he wasn't going to lose her again. Together, they would unravel the mystery, confront the threat, and maybe, just maybe, find their way back to the love they had lost. As the elevator carried them back to the surface, back to a world that had no idea how close it was to the brink of chaos, David made a silent vow. He would see this through to the end, no matter the cost. For Elena, for the life they might have had, and for the future they might still build together. The doors slid open, revealing the first light of dawn. A new day was beginning, and with it, a new chapter in David and Elena's story. One that promised danger, intrigue, and the possibility of redemption. As they stepped out into the quiet street, both knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The following days passed in a whirlwind of activity for David and Elena. They divided their time between the underground command center and David's penthouse, which had been transformed into a makeshift war room. Maps, financial reports, and surveillance photos covered every available surface, creating a tapestry of conspiracy that grew more complex by the hour. David had called in sick to work for the first time in years, citing a family emergency. It wasn't entirely a lie. Elena had been his family once, and in many ways, she still was. The board of directors could handle things for a few days. Right now, his focus was on unraveling the mystery that had upended his life. As they worked, David found himself constantly stealing glances at Elena. She moved with a grace and purpose that was new to him, her fingers flying over keyboard keys as she hacked into secure servers and sifted through mountains of data. This was a side of her he had never known existed, and despite the circumstances, he couldn't help but be impressed. "I think I found something," Elena said on the third day, her voice cutting through the concentrated silence that had fallen over the penthouse. David moved to stand behind her, leaning in to look at her computer screen. The proximity sent a jolt through him, a reminder of the intimacy they had once shared. "What am I looking at?" he asked, forcing himself to focus on the task at hand. Elena pointed to a series of transactions highlighted on the screen. "These transfers, they're following a pattern I've seen before. It's a technique the syndicate uses to move large sums of money without attracting attention. But these," she highlighted another set of transactions. "These are different. They're using a similar method, but there are subtle differences. I think this might be our rogue faction at work." David studied the numbers, his years of financial expertise kicking in. "The amounts are significant," he mused. "And look at the timing. They all correspond with major market fluctuations over the past 6 months. If someone were trying to manipulate global markets, this is exactly how they'd do it." A grim smile played at the corners of Elena's lips. "Exactly. And if we follow this trail..." Her fingers flew over the keyboard, pulling up more data. A map appeared on the screen, red lines connecting various points across the globe. "These are the endpoints of those transactions. Notice anything interesting?" David leaned in closer, his eyes widening as he recognized the pattern. "They all lead back to one place, Dubai." Elena nodded. "The perfect hub for international finance, with enough luxury and secrecy to hide even the most suspicious activities. I think we've found our base of operations." As the implications of their discovery sank in, a sharp knock at the door made them both jump. David and Elena exchanged a worried glance. They weren't expecting anyone, and few people had access to this floor of the building. "Stay here," David said quietly, moving towards the door. He peered through the peephole, his breath catching in his throat at what he saw. "It's Marco," he hissed to Elena. "What do we do?" Elena's face paled. "We have to let him in. If he suspects anything, it could blow the whole operation. Just follow my lead." David nodded, taking a deep breath before opening the door. Marco stood in the hallway, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that couldn't quite hide the dangerous aura that surrounded him. His dark eyes took in the scene behind David, a slight frown creasing his brow. "Elena," he said, his accented voice smooth as silk. "I've been looking for you. I should have known I'd find you here." His gaze shifted to David, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Mr. Blackwood, how nice to see you again. I trust Elena has been catching you up on old times?" The tension in the room was palpable as Marco stepped inside, his eyes roving over the papers and computer screens scattered about. David felt his heart racing, acutely aware of how suspicious this must look. But Elena stepped forward, her composure perfect. "Marco, I'm glad you're here," she said, her voice steady. "I was just about to call you. We've made a breakthrough in the investigation." Marco's eyebrows raised slightly. "Oh, and you felt the need to involve Mr. Blackwood in our sensitive matters?" Elena moved to stand beside David, her hand brushing against his in a gesture that could have been accidental but felt deliberate. "David's financial expertise has been invaluable. He's helped us uncover a pattern we might have missed otherwise." For a moment, Marco said nothing, his gaze moving between David and Elena. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. "Well then, we should be grateful for Mr. Blackwood's assistance. Perhaps you'd care to fill me in on what you've discovered?" As Elena began to explain their findings, carefully omitting any mention of their suspicions about the rogue faction, David watched Marco closely. The man moved with a predator's grace, his attention seemingly on Elena's words but his eyes constantly scanning the room. David couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing a very dangerous game. "Fascinating," Marco said when Elena had finished. "This could indeed be the break we've been looking for. I'll need to take this information back to headquarters for further analysis, of course." Elena nodded, moving to gather some of the papers scattered on the desk. But as she did, David noticed Marco's hand move to his jacket pocket. A glint of metal caught his eye, the barrel of a gun. Time seemed to slow down. David's eyes met Elena's, and he saw the same realization dawning in her expression. They had miscalculated. Marco wasn't here for information, he was here to tie up loose ends. What happened next was a blur of motion and sound. As Marco began to draw his weapon, David lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the confined space of the penthouse. Elena screamed, but David couldn't tell if it was in fear or pain. He grappled with Marco on the floor, struggling to keep the gun pointed away from both himself and Elena. Marco was strong, his body honed by years of covert operations. But David had desperation on his side, the desperate need to protect Elena, to not lose her again when he had just found her. "Elena, run," David shouted, managing to land a solid punch to Marco's jaw. But Elena didn't run. Instead, he heard her rummaging through drawers, searching for something. Marco's elbow caught David in the ribs, knocking the wind out of him. As he gasped for air, he saw Marco raising the gun, a cold smile on his face. "You should have stayed out of this, Mr. Blackwood," he said. "Some mysteries are better left unsolved." But before he could pull the trigger, a loud crack echoed through the room. Marco's eyes widened in surprise, then rolled back in his head as he slumped to the floor. Behind him stood Elena, a heavy paperweight clutched in her shaking hands. For a moment, neither of them moved, the only sound their ragged breathing. Then Elena dropped the paperweight, rushing to David's side. "Are you all right?" she asked, her hands moving over him, checking for injuries. "I'm so sorry, David. I never meant for you to be in danger. This is exactly why I left, why I tried to keep you out of all this." David caught her hands in his, squeezing them gently. "I'm fine," he assured her. "But we need to get out of here. It won't be long before someone comes looking for him." Elena nodded, her professional composure returning. "You're right. We need to move fast. Grab anything essential, documents, your passport, anything we can't replace. We have a safe house in the city where we can regroup." As they hurriedly packed, David's mind raced. In the span of a few days, he had gone from a respected businessman to a fugitive, embroiled in a global conspiracy he barely understood. But as he watched Elena move purposefully around the room, he knew he had made the right choice. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. Within minutes, they were in the elevator, descending to the underground parking garage. Elena produced a set of keys, leading them to a nondescript sedan parked in a dark corner. "It's clean," she explained as they got in. "No GPS, untraceable plates. We use it for situations like this." As they pulled out of the garage and into the bustling New York traffic, David finally allowed himself to take a deep breath. "So what's our next move?" he asked, glancing at Elena's determined profile. She was quiet for a moment, her eyes scanning the rearview mirror for any signs of pursuit. "We need to get to Dubai," she said finally. "That's where the heart of this conspiracy is. But we can't just walk in the front door, we need a plan, resources." David nodded, his mind already working on the problem. "I have contacts in Dubai, business associates who owe me favors. And offshore accounts that even the board doesn't know about. If we play this right, we might be able to infiltrate whatever operation they're running there." A small smile played at the corners of Elena's lips. "I always knew you were more than just a handsome face in a boardroom," she said, a hint of her old playfulness returning. "All right, let's hear this plan of yours." As David began to outline his ideas, he felt a surge of excitement mixed with fear. They were embarking on a dangerous mission with global stakes, facing an enemy that was always one step ahead. But for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. The woman he loved was by his side, and together, they just might save the world. The safe house turned out to be a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood of Queens. As Elena secured the perimeter, checking for signs of surveillance or intrusion, David took stock of their situation. In the span of a few hours, they had gone from respected members of high society to fugitives. His penthouse was now a crime scene, and it was only a matter of time before Marco's disappearance raised alarms within the Chimera syndicate. "We should be safe here for now," Elena said, drawing the curtains closed. "But we can't stay long. Once they realize Marco's missing, this will be one of the first places they check." David nodded, sinking onto a worn couch. The adrenaline of their escape was wearing off, leaving him feeling drained. "Elena," he said quietly, I need you to be completely honest with me. How deep does this go? What are we really up against? Elena was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on some point in the distance. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with the weight of secrets long held. The Chimera Syndicate. It's not just about manipulating markets or influencing politics. We're talking about an organization with roots going back centuries. They've shaped the course of history, started and ended wars, toppled governments. And now, a faction within the syndicate wants to take that power to the next level. She moved to sit beside David, her proximity both comforting and electrifying. The plan we uncovered, it's not just about causing a financial crisis. They're aiming for nothing less than a complete reset of the global order. Imagine a world where a select few control every aspect of society, finance, technology, even the food and water supply. That's what we're fighting against. The enormity of what Elena was describing made David's head spin. But why? He asked. What could possibly motivate someone to want that kind of power? Elena's laugh was bitter. The usual reasons: greed, ideology, a messiah complex. Some of them genuinely believe they're saving the world by controlling it. Others just want to be gods among men. But the why doesn't matter as much as stopping them. David reached out, taking Elena's hand in his. The simple touch sent a jolt through him, a reminder of the connection they had once shared, and perhaps still did. We will stop them, he said with a conviction that surprised even him. Together, Elena's eyes met his, a whirlwind of emotions swirling in their depths. For a moment, David thought she might pull away. But then she leaned in, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was both familiar and thrillingly new. It was a kiss that spoke of lost time, of regret and hope, of a love that had never truly died. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Elena rested her forehead against David's. "I've missed you," she whispered. "Every day for the past 10 years, I've missed you." David cupped her face in his hands, drinking in the sight of her. "Then let's make sure we don't waste any more time," he said softly. "Whatever happens next, we face it together. No more secrets, no more running." Elena nodded, a determined smile spreading across her face. "All right then, partner, let's save the world." The next few hours were a flurry of activity as they prepared for their mission to Dubai. David reached out to his contacts, arranging for funds to be transferred and identities to be created. Elena tapped into her network of syndicate informants, gathering intelligence on the rogue faction's operations in the city. As night fell, they found themselves hunched over a laptop, poring over blueprints and security protocols for some of Dubai's most exclusive locations. The Dubai International Financial Center, Elena mused, pointing to a complex of sleek skyscrapers on the screen. "That's where we'll find the heart of their operation. But getting in won't be easy." David studied the layout, his mind racing with possibilities. "What if we don't try to sneak in?" he said slowly. "What if we walk right through the front door?" Elena raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" A smile spread across David's face, the same smile that had sealed countless business deals and charmed socialites at galas. "We go in as ourselves, or rather, as the people they expect us to be. The prodigal wife returns with her wealthy husband, looking to invest in some exciting new ventures. It's the perfect cover for poking around and asking questions." Elena's eyes lit up as she caught on to his plan. "And with your real-world business credentials, no one would question our presence." "David, that's brilliant." As they continued to refine their plan, David couldn't help but marvel at how naturally they worked together. It was as if the years apart had never happened, their minds still perfectly in sync. But beneath the exhilaration of their shared mission, a nagging worry gnawed at him. "Elena," he said during a lull in their planning, "what happens after? If we manage to stop this plot, expose the rogue faction, where does that leave us?" Elena was quiet for a moment, her eyes fixed on the computer screen. When she finally looked up at David, her expression was a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "I don't know," she admitted. "The syndicate has been my life for so long. But being with you again, working together like this, it feels right in a way nothing has for years." She reached out, taking David's hand in hers. "I can't promise what the future holds," she said softly. But I know I don't want to lose you again. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together. Okay? David nodded, bringing her hand to his lips for a gentle kiss. Together, he agreed. As they returned to their planning, both felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were no longer just fighting to save the world. They were fighting for a chance at the future they had been denied for so long. A future that, against all odds, suddenly seemed within reach. The next morning found them at JFK Airport, boarding a private jet bound for Dubai. As the plane took off, carrying them towards danger and destiny, David gazed out the window at the receding New York skyline. Somewhere down there was the life he had built in Elena's absence. The boardrooms, the galas, the empty penthouse. He was leaving it all behind, stepping into a world of shadows and secrets. But as he felt Elena's hand slip into his, he knew he had made the right choice. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers they might face, they would face them together. The mystery of the vanished wife had evolved into something far greater, a fight for the future of the world itself. As the plane soared over the Atlantic, David allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. In just a few days, his life had been turned upside down. He had gone from a man haunted by the past to one racing towards an uncertain future. But for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. With Elena by his side and a world to save, David Blackwood was ready for whatever came next. The game was afoot. The game was afoot, and the stakes could not be higher. As the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, Elena pulled out a sleek laptop and began typing furiously. David leaned over, curious about what had captured her attention so intently. "What are you working on?" he asked, his voice low despite the privacy of their chartered jet. Elena's eyes never left the screen as she replied, "I'm tapping into the syndicate's communication networks. If we're going to pull this off, we need to be one step ahead at all times." David watched in amazement as lines of code scrolled across the screen. This was a side of Elena he was still getting used to, the skilled hacker and covert operative. It was a far cry from the socialite wife he had known, but he found himself admiring her even more for her hidden depths. "There," Elena said triumphantly after several minutes of intense concentration. "I've managed to intercept some encrypted messages. It'll take time to decode them, but this should give us a better idea of what we're walking into." As Elena worked on decrypting the messages, David turned his attention to the dossiers they had compiled on key players in Dubai's financial scene. If their plan was going to work, he needed to be able to blend seamlessly into the world of high-stakes international finance. The hours flew by as they prepared, refining their cover stories and strategizing for every possible contingency. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues visible through the plane's windows, David felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. "We should try to get some rest," Elena said, finally closing her laptop. "Once we land in Dubai, we'll need to be at the top of our game." David nodded, reclining his seat. But as he closed his eyes, he found sleep elusive. His mind raced with the possibilities and dangers that lay ahead. After a few minutes of restless attempts, he felt Elena's hand slip into his. "Having trouble sleeping?" she asked softly. David turned to face her, struck once again by how beautiful she was, even in the dim cabin light. "Just thinking about everything that's at stake," he admitted. "Elena, are we crazy for doing this? Two people against a global conspiracy?" Elena's smile was both fierce and tender. "Maybe we are crazy," she said. "But sometimes it takes a little insanity to change the world. And David, there's no one I'd rather be crazy with than you." With those words, she leaned in and kissed him. It was a kiss that spoke of shared purpose, of rediscovered love, and of the promise of a future together, if they could survive the challenges ahead. As the kiss deepened, David felt the years of loneliness and loss melt away. Whatever happened in Dubai, whatever dangers they might face, he knew that finding Elena again made it all worthwhile. They spent the remainder of the flight in each other's arms, alternating between passionate embraces and quiet conversations about the life they hoped to build once this was all over. It was a stolen moment of peace before the storm, and both David and Elena cherished it. As the first glimmers of dawn began to paint the horizon, the pilot's voice came over the intercom, announcing their descent into Dubai International Airport. David and Elena exchanged a look of determination as they prepared for landing. "Ready to change the world, Mr. Blackwood?" Elena asked, a hint of her old playfulness in her voice. David took her hand, squeezing it gently. "With you by my side, Mrs. Blackwood, I'm ready for anything." As the plane touched down on the runway, both felt the weight of their mission settle upon them. The glittering skyline of Dubai loomed in the distance, a city of ambition and excess that held the key to unraveling a global conspiracy. The game was indeed afoot, and David and Elena were prepared to play it to the fullest. With billions of lives hanging in the balance and their own future at stake, they stepped off the plane and into a world of danger, intrigue, and unlimited possibility. Little did they know that their greatest challenges, and most shocking revelations, still lay ahead. The mystery of Elena's disappearance had led them to the brink of a global crisis, and only by working together could they hope to save not just their love, but the entire world. As they made their way through the opulent Dubai airport, David and Elena shared one last meaningful glance. It was time to put their plan into action. The next move in this high-stakes game was theirs, and they intended to make it count. The Dubai sun beat down mercilessly as David and Elena stepped out of their limousine in front of the Burj Al Arab, the iconic sail-shaped hotel that had become synonymous with luxury and excess. They were dressed to impress, David in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit, Elena resplendent in a Chanel dress that hugged her curves. To anyone watching, they appeared to be just another wealthy couple come to play in the playground of the rich and famous. But appearances, as they both knew all too well, could be deceiving. "Remember," Elena murmured as they walked arm in arm through the hotel's opulent lobby, "we're here to make connections, not waves. The key is to blend in while keeping our eyes and ears open." David nodded almost imperceptibly, his practiced smile never wavering. "Understood. Though I have to say, 10 years ago I never would have imagined us playing spies in Dubai." Elena's laugh was genuine, tinged with a hint of the carefree woman she had once been. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" As they checked into their suite, a palatial affair with views of the Persian Gulf that took David's breath away, they were acutely aware of the eyes upon them. In a place like this, new faces were always subject to scrutiny, especially those with apparent wealth and influence. Once alone in their room, Elena immediately began a sweep for surveillance devices while David unpacked their specialized equipment, hidden cameras, encrypted communications devices, and other tools of the trade that still felt foreign in his hands. "All clear," Elena announced after a thorough check. "But we should assume that everything we say and do outside of this room is being monitored." David nodded, his mind already racing with the next steps of their plan. "The Global Finance Summit starts tomorrow. That's our best chance to make contact with our targets and start piecing together the puzzle." Elena pulled out her laptop, bringing up a series of dossiers. "I've identified 3 key players we need to focus on," she said, her voice slipping into a tone of professional detachment that still unnerved David slightly. "First, there's Alexander Volkov, a Russian oligarch with ties to both the energy sector and several major banks. Our intelligence suggests he's one of the primary funders of the rogue faction." David studied the image of a bear-like man with cold eyes and a calculating smile. "I've heard of him. Notorious for hostile takeovers and not above using less than legal means to get what he wants." Elena nodded grimly. "Exactly. Then we have Mei Chen, a Chinese tech mogul. Her companies have been at the forefront of AI and blockchain technology. We believe she's providing the technical infrastructure for whatever the rogue faction is planning." The image on the screen shifted to a striking woman in her late 30s, her sharp features softened by an enigmatic smile. David felt a chill run down his spine. There was something predatory in those eyes. "And finally," Elena continued, "there's Hassan al-Rashid, our gracious host for this summit. On the surface, he's a respected Emirati businessman and philanthropist. But we have reason to believe he's the linchpin holding this entire operation together." The final image showed a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, his traditional thobe impeccably pressed, his smile warm but his eyes unreadable. David absorbed the information, his mind already formulating strategies. So, divide and conquer, he suggested. I can approach Volkov. We have some mutual acquaintances in the oil business. You might have better luck with Chen, given your tech background. Elena nodded approvingly. Good thinking. And Al-Rashid will likely seek us out himself. A new power couple on his turf won't go unnoticed for long. As they continued to plan, David found himself marveling at how naturally they worked together. It was as if the years apart had never happened, their minds still perfectly in sync. But beneath the exhilaration of their shared mission, a nagging worry gnawed at him. Elena, he said during a lull in their strategizing, what happens after? If we manage to stop this plot, expose the rogue faction, where does that leave us? Elena was quiet for a moment, her eyes fixed on the spectacular view outside their window. When she finally looked back at David, her expression was a mixture of hope and uncertainty. I don't know, she admitted softly. The syndicate has been my life for so long. But being with you again, working together like this, it feels right in a way nothing has for years. She reached out, taking David's hand in hers. I can't promise what the future holds, she continued. But I know I don't want to lose you again. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together. Okay? David nodded, bringing her hand to his lips for a gentle kiss. Together, he agreed. As night fell over Dubai, casting the city in a dazzling array of lights, David and Elena made their way to a pre-summit cocktail party on the hotel's rooftop terrace. It was time to set their plan in motion. The party was a glittering affair, filled with the world's financial elite. Champagne flowed freely, deals were made with handshakes and knowing nods, and the air was thick with the perfume of wealth and power. David smoothly inserted himself into a group of energy executives, his years of experience in high-stakes business dealings serving him well. It wasn't long before he found himself face-to-face with Alexander Volkov. Mr. Blackwood, the Russian's voice was a low rumble, his accent thick. I've heard much about you. Your recent acquisitions in the North Sea have not gone unnoticed. David smiled, raising his glass in a small salute. Nothing escapes your attention, does it, Mr. Volkov? I'm flattered to have caught your eye. As they fell into a discussion about oil prices and emerging markets, David carefully steered the conversation towards more sensitive topics, probing for any information that might shed light on the rogue faction's plans. Across the terrace, Elena was engaged in an animated conversation with Mei Chen, their heads bent close together as they discussed the latest advancements in quantum computing. To any observer, they appeared to be nothing more than two brilliant women sharing ideas. But beneath the technical jargon, a dangerous game of cat and mouse was playing out. Your work on distributed ledger technology is fascinating, Ms. Chen, Elena was saying, her eyes sharp despite her relaxed posture. I can think of so many interesting applications. May's smile was razor thin. I'm sure you can, Mrs. Blackwood. The potential is limitless, for those with the vision to seize it. As the night wore on, David and Elena circulated separately, gathering snippets of information and making mental notes of suspicious behavior. But it was clear that breaking through the layers of secrecy surrounding their targets would take more than one night of schmoozing. It was nearing midnight when Hassan al-Rashid finally made his approach. The Emirati businessman seemed to materialize out of the crowd, his presence commanding immediate attention. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, he said warmly, clasping David's hand and kissing Elena's cheek in greeting. Welcome to Dubai. I trust you're finding everything to your liking? It's been wonderful, Mr. Al-Rashid, Elena replied smoothly. Your hospitality is unmatched. Al-Rashid's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Please, call me Hassan. I hope you'll join me for a private dinner tomorrow night. I have a business proposition that I think will interest you both greatly. As they accepted the invitation, David felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, their chance to get closer to the heart of the conspiracy. But as he met Al-Rashid's calculating gaze, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into the lion's den. Later that night, as David and Elena debriefed in the security of their suite, the enormity of what they were undertaking hit home. They were two people up against a vast, shadowy network with seemingly unlimited resources. The odds were stacked against them, and one wrong move could mean not just failure, but likely their deaths. "We're close to something big," Elena said, poring over the notes they'd made. The way Volkov and Chen were talking about market disruptions and tech integration, it all points to a massive, coordinated event. David nodded, his mind racing. Al-Rashid is the key. Whatever this business proposition is, I bet it's connected to the rogue faction's endgame. As they continued to piece together the puzzle, a sudden knock at the door made them both freeze. It was well past 2 a.m. Who could be calling at this hour? Elena motioned for David to stay back as she approached the door, one hand hovering near the concealed weapon at her thigh. She peered through the peephole, then visibly relaxed. "Room service," she said, a note of confusion in her voice. "But we didn't order anything." David joined her at the door as she opened it. A hotel employee stood there, looking slightly nervous, with a silver tray in his hands. On it was a single envelope. "Compliments of Mr. Al-Rashid," the young man said, handing over the tray before quickly retreating. With cautious movements, Elena opened the envelope. Inside was a simple card with an address and a time. Dubai Diamond Exchange. 3 p.m. tomorrow. Come alone. David and Elena exchanged a look of mingled excitement and apprehension. This was an unexpected development, and potentially a dangerous one. "It's a trap," David said flatly. Elena nodded, her expression grim. "Almost certainly. But it's also an opportunity we can't afford to pass up." As they debated their next move, weighing the risks against the potential rewards, one thing became clear. Their mission in Dubai had just taken a turn into even more perilous territory. The glittering city outside their window suddenly seemed full of shadows, each one potentially concealing a threat. As they prepared for bed, both David and Elena knew that the next day would bring them face to face with the heart of the conspiracy they had traveled halfway around the world to unravel. The game was escalating, the stakes rising with every passing hour. But with their rekindled love and combined skills, David and Elena were determined to see this through to the end, whatever that end might be. As they lay in bed, Elena curled into David's side. He couldn't help but marvel at the twists and turns that had brought them to this moment. From a shattered past to a dangerous present, with the fate of the world hanging in the balance. "Whatever happens tomorrow," David whispered into the darkness, "I want you to know that I love you, Elena. I never stopped loving you." Elena's response was to pull him closer, her lips finding his in a kiss that spoke volumes. As they lost themselves in each other, the dangers of tomorrow faded into the background, if only for a moment. But as the first light of dawn began to creep over the Dubai skyline, reality came rushing back. The day ahead promised revelations, danger, and decisions that would shape not just their future, but potentially the future of the entire world. David and Elena rose to face it together, their resolve strengthened by their rediscovered love and shared purpose. The mystery that had begun with a vanished wife had evolved into something far greater, and its resolution was now within their grasp. As they prepared for the day ahead, both knew that by the time the sun set over Dubai once more, nothing would ever be the same again. The Dubai sun was at its zenith, turning the city into a shimmering mirage of glass and steel, as David and Elena made their final preparations. The invitation to the Dubai Diamond Exchange weighed heavily on their minds, a potential trap that they couldn't afford to ignore. "I don't like this," David said for what felt like the 100th time, adjusting the hidden camera disguised as a tie-pin. "We should be going in together." Elena's face was a mask of concentration as she checked her own equipment. "We've been over this, David." The invitation was clear. "I go in alone. You'll be my eyes and ears from the surveillance van. It's our best shot at getting the information we need without raising suspicions." David knew she was right, but that didn't make it any easier. The thought of Elena walking into danger alone made his chest tighten with anxiety. "Just be careful," he said softly, pulling her close for a kiss that held all the words he couldn't say. As Elena stepped out of their hotel, looking every inch the confident businesswoman in a sleek Armani suit, David made his way to the nondescript van parked a block away. Inside, a bank of monitors and communications equipment awaited him. It was time to put their plan into action. The Dubai Diamond Exchange was a fortress of security, its walls housing some of the most valuable gems in the world. Elena's heart raced as she passed through layer after layer of checkpoints, her cover story as a potential investor holding up under scrutiny. "I'm in," she murmured, her words picked up by the microphone hidden in her necklace. "Copy that." David's voice came through her nearly invisible earpiece. "Remember, we're looking for any information on large-scale diamond acquisitions or unusual trading patterns. And Elena, watch your back." The trading floor of the exchange was a hive of activity, with dealers and buyers huddled over tables, examining stones worth millions. Elena moved through the crowd with purpose, her eyes scanning for familiar faces. It didn't take long for Hassan al-Rashid to find her. "Mrs. Blackwood," his voice was smooth as silk as he materialized at her elbow. "I'm so glad you could join us. Please, follow me. There's something I'd like to show you." Elena's pulse quickened as al-Rashid led her away from the main floor, towards a secure area marked "Private Viewings." As they passed through another set of security doors, she caught a glimpse of Alexander Volkov and Mei Chen waiting inside. "What's happening?" David's voice crackled with tension in her ear. "I've lost visual." "Patience, my love," Elena murmured, disguising her words as a cough. She had a feeling they were about to get the answers they'd been seeking, for better or worse. The private viewing room was dimly lit, its walls lined with safety deposit boxes. At the center stood a table with a black velvet cloth draped over something Elena couldn't quite make out. "My friends," al-Rashid addressed the small group, "what we are about to discuss does not leave this room. Mrs. Blackwood, I believe you've already met Mr. Volkov and Miss Chen?" Elena nodded, her mind racing. What was this all about? Al-Rashid's smile was triumphant as he pulled back the velvet cloth, revealing a sight that made Elena's breath catch in her throat. Spread out on the table was an array of diamonds unlike anything she had ever seen. They were massive, perfectly cut, and possessed a faint blue glow that seemed to pulse with an inner light. "Behold," al-Rashid said, his voice reverent, "the future of global finance." In the surveillance van, David leaned closer to the monitors, straining to hear every word through Elena's hidden microphone. "What you see before you," al-Rashid continued, "are not mere diamonds. These are the product of years of research and billions in investment. We call them quantum diamonds, and they are about to revolutionize the world as we know it." Mei Chen stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Each of these diamonds contains millions of nitrogen vacancy centers, quantum defects that can store and process vast amounts of data. In essence, we have created the world's most secure and powerful quantum computers, disguised as precious gems." Elena's mind reeled at the implications. "And the applications of this technology?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Volkov's laugh was a low rumble. "Everything, my dear. Financial systems, military networks, government databases, all vulnerable to whoever controls these diamonds. And control them we shall. Imagine," al-Rashid said, his voice taking on a zealous quality, "a new world order. One where the flow of information, of wealth, of power, is dictated not by nations or corporations, but by us. A select few, guiding humanity towards a brighter future." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. This was bigger than anything they had imagined. The rogue faction wasn't just planning to manipulate markets. They were aiming to reshape the entire global power structure. "It's an ambitious plan," Elena said carefully, "but surely the world's governments and tech giants won't simply stand by and let this happen?" Al-Rashid's smile was cold. "By the time they realize what's happening, it will be too late. In fact, the first phase of our plan is already in motion. Which brings us to why you're here, Mrs. Blackwood." He gestured to a safety deposit box on the wall. "Your husband's companies hold key patents in quantum computing. Patents that would be very useful to our cause. We'd like you to convince him to sign them over to us." Elena's heart raced. They had no idea that she and David were working together. This was both a danger and an opportunity. And if he refuses? Volkov's hand moved to his jacket, the outline of a gun clearly visible. Then perhaps he will have an unfortunate accident. So tragic, these things happen all the time. In the van, David's fists clenched at the thinly veiled threat. He wanted nothing more than to burst in there and get Elena out. But he forced himself to remain calm. They needed more information. I see, Elena said, her voice betraying no emotion. And what do we stand to gain from this arrangement? Al-Rashid's eyes gleamed. A place at the table, my dear. A chance to be part of the New World elite. Wealth and power beyond your wildest dreams. As the group continued to discuss the details of their plan, Elena's mind worked furiously. They needed to get this information to the authorities, to stop this madness before it was too late. But how to get out of here without raising suspicions? The answer came in the form of an unexpected ally. A commotion outside the viewing room drew everyone's attention. The door burst open, revealing a breathless security guard. Mr. Al-Rashid, there's been a breach in the main vault. We need you immediately. In the confusion that followed, Elena saw her chance. As Al-Rashid and the others rushed to deal with the apparent crisis, she palmed one of the quantum diamonds, slipping it into a hidden pocket in her jacket. I'll just wait here, shall I? She called after them, but they were already gone. David, she whispered urgently, I'm getting out of here. Meet me at the extraction point. Copy that, came the reply. Elena, be careful. Heart pounding, Elena made her way out of the private viewing area and back to the main floor of the exchange. She was almost to the exit when a hand clamped down on her arm. Not so fast, Mrs. Blackwood, Mei Chen's voice was ice cold. Did you really think we'd let you walk out of here with our property? Elena's training kicked in. In one fluid motion, she broke Chen's grip and delivered a sharp elbow to the woman's solar plexus. As Chen doubled over, gasping for air, Elena sprinted for the exit. Alarms blared as she burst out onto the street, the hot Dubai air hitting her like a wall. She could hear shouts behind her, the sound of pursuing footsteps growing closer. David, she yelled into her comm, I need an exit, now. The screech of tires answered her call. The surveillance van came barreling around the corner, David at the wheel. Elena dove in through the side door as bullets pinged off the van's armored exterior. Go, 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 she shouted, and David floored it. As they weaved through Dubai's busy streets, Elena quickly filled David in on what she had discovered. His face grew grim as he realized the magnitude of what they were up against. We need to get this information to the authorities, he said, swerving to avoid a pursuing SUV. But who can we trust? If what you're saying is true, they could have infiltrated governments at the highest levels. Elena clutched the stolen quantum diamond, its faint blue glow visible even through the fabric of her pocket. I have an idea, she said, but you're not going to like it. Before David could respond, the back window of the van exploded in a shower of glass. Volkov's face was visible in a pursuing car, his gun aimed squarely at them. Whatever your plan is, David shouted over the chaos, I hope it's a good one. Because I have a feeling things are about to get a whole lot worse before they get better. As they raced through the streets of Dubai, the fate of the world literally in their hands, David and Elena knew that the final confrontation was yet to come. The mystery that had begun with a vanished wife had evolved into a fight for the very future of humanity. And as the sun began to set over the city's gleaming spires, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out like grasping fingers, both David and Elena steeled themselves for the challenges ahead. Whatever came next, they would face it together, two against the world, with everything to lose and everything to fight for. The van swerved onto a quieter street, buying them a moment's respite from their pursuers. Elena pulled out her phone, her fingers flying over the keyboard. What are you doing? David asked, his eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. Calling in a favor, Elena replied, her voice tight with concentration. From someone who owes me big time. As they drove deeper into the heart of Dubai, the sun dipping below the horizon and casting the city in a golden glow, David and Elena knew that the next few hours would determine not just their fate, but the fate of the entire world. The quantum diamond in Elena's pocket seemed to pulse with potential energy, a constant reminder of the power they now held, and the danger that came with it. The chase was on, the stakes higher than ever before. And as night fell over Dubai, the real battle was just beginning. The Dubai night was alive with flashing lights and the wail of sirens as David maneuvered their battered van through the labyrinthine streets of the old city. Elena was still on her phone, her voice low and urgent as she spoke in a language David didn't recognize. "Who exactly are you calling?" David asked as he took a sharp turn, momentarily losing their pursuers. Elena ended the call, her face a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Remember how I told you I worked for a secret organization? Well, let's just say I'm calling in a favor from the other secret organization." David's eyebrows shot up. "There's another one?" "David, my love, there's always another one," Elena said with a grim smile. "The Chimera Syndicate isn't the only player in this game. There's a group that's been working to keep them in check for centuries. They call themselves the Guardians." As if on cue, a sleek black helicopter appeared overhead, its searchlight cutting through the darkness. For a moment, David feared it was Al-Rashid's men, but then a rope ladder unfurled from the chopper's open door. "That's our ride," Elena shouted over the roar of the rotors. "Think you can get us to that rooftop?" David gritted his teeth, eyeing the narrow alleyways and the flat-roofed building Elena was pointing to. "Hold on tight," he warned, then gunned the engine. The van screamed through the alleyways, scraping against walls and sending market stalls flying. Behind them, their pursuers were caught off guard by the sudden change in direction. With a final burst of speed, David crashed through a wooden gate and onto a wide plaza at the base of the building. "Now what?" he yelled, but Elena was already moving. She flung open the van's door and sprinted for the building's fire escape, David close on her heels. They could hear shouts and gunfire behind them as Al-Rashid's men closed in. They raced up the stairs, lungs burning, the helicopter hovering tantalizingly close above them. Just as they reached the roof, a bullet whizzed past David's ear. He turned to see Volkov emerging from the stairwell, gun raised. "It's over," the Russian growled. "Give us the diamond and perhaps we'll let you live." David stepped in front of Elena, shielding her with his body. "You'll have to kill me first," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. Volkov's smile was cold. "As you wish." But before he could pull the trigger, a blinding light engulfed the rooftop. The helicopter had descended, its powerful searchlight disorienting Volkov. In that moment of confusion, Elena made her move. With a swift kick, she disarmed the Russian, sending his gun skittering across the rooftop. "Come on," she shouted to David, grabbing the rope ladder that now dangled within reach. David didn't need to be told twice. He leapt for the ladder, Elena right behind him. As they were lifted into the night sky, David looked down to see Volkov and his men growing smaller, their angry shouts fading into the distance. His heart was pounding, adrenaline surging through his veins. They had made it, but he knew this was far from over. Inside the helicopter, they were greeted by a stern-faced woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to look right through them. "Elena," she said, her voice carrying even over the roar of the engines, "it's been a long time." Elena nodded respectfully. "Madam Director, thank you for the timely rescue." The woman's gaze shifted to David. "And this must be the husband we've heard so much about. Welcome to the world behind the curtain, Mr. Blackwood." As the helicopter sped away from Dubai, its glittering skyline receding into the distance, the Madam Director briefed them on the situation. The Guardians had been monitoring the Chimera Syndicate's activities for months, suspecting that something big was in the works. Elena's intel about the quantum diamonds was the missing piece they needed. "What you've stumbled upon," the Director explained, "is nothing short of a plan to reshape the global order. Those diamonds, if deployed as intended, could give Al-Rashid and his cohorts unprecedented control over the world's digital infrastructure. Financial systems, military networks, communication grids, all would be at their mercy." David's mind reeled at the implications. "So what's the plan?" "We can't let them succeed." The Director's smile was razor-thin. "That, Mr. Blackwood, is where you and Elena come in. We're going to beat them at their own game." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity as they touched down at a secret airfield and were whisked away to the Guardians' command center. It was a high-tech fortress buried deep beneath the desert, its very existence known only to a select few. As they worked feverishly to counter Al-Rashid's plan, David found himself in awe of Elena. This was her world, and she moved through it with a confidence and skill that both impressed and humbled him. For the first time, he truly understood the magnitude of the sacrifice she had made in leaving it all behind for him. The plan they devised was audacious, relying on equal parts technology and human ingenuity. Using the stolen quantum diamond as a key, they would infiltrate the Chimera Syndicate's network and turn their own technology against them. But to do so, they would need to get close to the heart of the operation, which meant walking right back into the lion's den. As they prepared for the final confrontation, David pulled Elena aside. "When this is all over," he said softly, "what happens to us? Do you go back to this life of secrets and shadows?" Elena's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she cupped his face in her hands. "Oh, David, don't you see? There's no going back, for either of us. Whatever happens next, we face it together. You're my home, my anchor in this crazy world. I'm not losing you again." Their kiss was passionate, tinged with the bittersweet knowledge of the dangers that lay ahead. But in that moment, both David and Elena knew with absolute certainty that they would move heaven and earth to build a future together. The final assault on the Chimera Syndicate's headquarters was a masterclass in precision and teamwork. David, Elena, and a hand-picked team of Guardian operatives infiltrated the sprawling complex under the cover of darkness. Using a combination of high-tech gadgetry and good old-fashioned subterfuge, they made their way to the heart of the facility, a vast server room where the quantum diamonds were being prepared for deployment. It was there that they confronted Al-Rashid and his inner circle. The ensuing battle was fierce, a desperate struggle for control of technology that could reshape the world. David found himself fighting alongside Elena, their movements perfectly in sync as they faced down opponents with vastly superior numbers. In the end, it came down to a battle of wits as much as brawn. While Elena and the team held off Al-Rashid's forces, David raced against time to upload a virus that would neutralize the quantum diamonds and expose the Syndicate's plans to the world. As alarms blared and gunfire echoed through the complex, David's fingers flew over the keyboard. He could hear Elena shouting encouragement, her voice rising above the chaos. With seconds to spare, he hit the final key, unleashing a cascade of data that would bring down the Chimera Syndicate once and for all. The aftermath was a blur of debriefings, news reports, and a gradual return to a world that seemed both familiar and utterly changed. The exposure of the Syndicate's plot sent shockwaves through the global financial and political systems. For weeks, David and Elena watched from the sidelines as the world grappled with the revelations, a new order slowly emerging from the ashes of the old. It was a month after their return to New York that Elena broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "So," she said, curled up next to David on the couch in their penthouse, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows, "what do we do now? Go back to our old lives like none of this ever happened?" David chuckled, pulling her closer. "Somehow I don't think that's an option anymore. We've seen too much, done too much, to just go back to board meetings and charity galas." Elena nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. "The Guardians offered me a position, actually. They were quite impressed with your performance." "Tempting," David mused, "but I think I've had enough of secret organizations for one lifetime. What if..." He paused, an idea taking shape. "What if we used what we've learned, the connections we've made, to do some good in the world? On our own terms." Elena's eyes lit up. "A foundation, maybe? Using our resources and expertise to tackle global issues, but from the private sector?" As they discussed the possibilities, their excitement growing with each passing moment, both David and Elena felt a sense of purpose they had been missing for years. They had been given a second chance, not just at love, but at making a real difference in the world. In the years that followed, the Blackwood Foundation became known as a force for positive change, leveraging cutting-edge technology and a vast network of global contacts to address everything from climate change to economic inequality. David and Elena worked side by side, their complementary skills and shared vision driving them to ever greater heights. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and they had time to reflect, they would often think back to that fateful night in Dubai. The night when a mystery that began with a vanished wife led them on an adventure that changed not just their lives, but the course of history itself. As they stood on the balcony of their penthouse, the city spread out before them like a tapestry of lights and possibilities, David pulled Elena close. "You know," he said softly, "I never did thank you for disappearing on me all those years ago." Elena looked up at him, a quizzical expression on her face. "Oh, and why would you thank me for that?" David's smile was warm as he gazed into the eyes of the woman who had turned his world upside down in the most wonderful way possible. "Because without that mystery, without those years apart, we might never have discovered just how extraordinary we could be together." As their lips met in a tender kiss, the New York skyline bearing witness to their enduring love, David and Elena Blackwood knew that their greatest adventure was still unfolding. For in each other, they had found not just a partner, but a home, a foundation strong enough to weather any storm and chase any dream. And as the stars twinkled overhead, seeming to wink in approval of their hard-won happiness, both David and Elena silently vowed to never take this second chance for granted. For they had learned, through trial and tribulation, that true love was the greatest adventure of all, and one worth fighting for, no matter the odds.